also a mean to ask for help. And that's something that I think sometimes is a challenge. There's so much stigma, and everybody wants their child to do well and to be the first in the class, but actually development, especially in the early years, looks very different. Every child has its own trajectory, and that's totally fine. Our job is just to help them thrive within their trajectory. So use it more as a conversation generator, use them more as an indication and a guidance on how to support the child rather than a test.
You've been listening to Child with me, Indira Akison. The producer was Georgia Ander. This was a Listen production for BBC Radio 4.
And you can hear the next episode of Child, which is all about attachment, at the same time next week.
I said to my optometrist recently, you and me are actually quite similar, because I'm a comedian and my new show Michael Spicer No Room on BBC Radio 4 promises a mix of brilliant topical sketches and characters. And he said, so what? So I explained our shared goal in life is to make people see the world differently. But he said, that's tenuous. Just read the bottom line. So I said XFDQYE, and he laughed and said, I hope your satire is sharper than your eyesight. You can have that one. I hate it when people say that.
Michael Spicer, No Room.
Doesn't wear glasses either. Optometrists who don't wear glasses are just gluten-free.
Starts on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds tomorrow night at 11.
Is there any way to get rid of slugs without killing them? We'll find out after the news in Gardener's Question Time. BBC News at 3 o'clock. An asylum seeker from Morocco who was found guilty of murdering a 70-year-old stranger and trying to kill a housemate has been jailed for life. Ahmed Alaid, who's 45, had told police the attacks in Hartlepool last October were in revenge for the war between Israel and Hamas. He has spent a minimum of 45 years in prison. Alaid was sentenced at Teesside Crown Court by Mr. Justice Shamikra.
He attacked and murdered Terence Carney in a terrorist act. You intended it as revenge for the actions of a foreign country, Israel, and to intimidate and influence the British government in its international relations. You hoped to frighten the people of Britain and to undermine the freedoms they enjoy.
Police in France have shot dead a man who tried to set fire to a synagogue in the northwestern city of Rouen. The French Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, said when officers arrived at the building, they were confronted by a man wielding a knife and an iron bar. The first consignments of aid to be delivered using a temporary pier have been taken ashore in Gaza. The United States said about 500 tons of supplies would enter Gaza in the coming days. Russia's ambassador in London has accused the UK of being a de facto participant in the Ukraine war because of the weapons it's supplying to Kyiv. Andrei Klein also said the UK was sharing real-time intelligence with Ukraine. Newham Council has said a full investigation will be conducted into the death of a 5-year-old boy who fell from an apartment block in East London yesterday. The boy has been named locally as Alim Makail. The men's world #1 golfer, Scottie Scheffler, has been released after being handcuffed by police as he tried to reach the Valhalla course in Kentucky. He's due to play on the second day of the PGA Championship. Local media is reporting that the player attempted to ignore a police cordon after a road accident which he was not involved in. BBC News. In 3/4 of an hour, we've got a short story about a mystery illness. It's by Hayley Atwell, who won the BBC Young Writers Award in 2020. You can hear An Affliction at 4:15. Now though, Peter Gibbs and his green-fingered team of horticultural experts answer some gardening queries in Gardener's Question Time.
They say in gardening, you never stop learning. And today we visit a location where learning is the main line of work. Trinity is a college of the University of Oxford, one of the world's great centres of knowledge. But it's not just spires that do the dreaming here. The visionary gardens at Trinity have a long and distinguished history of their own. And here to tell us about the manicured and open green space here at the college is head gardener Kate Burtonwood. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
Well, thanks for inviting us here. It's an amazing space that we're actually standing in. I'm sure most of the Oxford colleges boast beautiful gardens, but tell us about the space that we're in here.
The entire site is about 6 acres, but more than half of that is just pure gardens. The 2 lawns that we've got in front of us are both about 2,500 metres of lawn. So Trinity was just outside the city walls when it was founded in 1555, and in fact before that there was a monastic institution on the site which was founded, I think, 1290, called Durham College. So yeah, really you get that sense that Oxford has grown around us, and now Parks Road and Broad Street, which border the college, are these really quite main thoroughfares. But there's a real sense of privacy within the college.
The gardens are still evolving, and I understand that one of our very own GPT panellists is involved in that evolution.
Yes, so I think we're all now signed up members of the Chris Birchall fan club, I think, here at Trinity. We have this enormous 800 square metre border which has really sort of sat out of use while this sort of 6 years of building projects have happened, with a large new building including an auditorium where we're recording Gardeners' Questions Home, restoration of our fallen kitchens, then the addition of ground source heat pumps. So all that has had a huge impact on the gardens and on the border area we have. So luckily for us is an area that Chris then was willing to take on. So we're very much looking forward to a really exciting final twist to our story at the moment.
Well, Mr. Birchall's always up for a challenge, so we'll follow that one very closely. And in fact, we'll hear from you later in the programme to explore more of the gardens with Chris Birchall. But now, joining Chris inside the De Jager Auditorium are 2 more gardening scholars. From Lancashire, it's learned plantswoman Christine Wharton, and from just across the road, Oxford Botanic Gardens, Dr. Chris Thorogood, a critical Chris Mass, and your Gardeners' Question Time panel. And who has our first question, please?
Hello, I'm Sue Burge. I'm from the Horton-cum-Studley Gardening Club. Now, we have a very tense competition in our village, and I need to win. We have to grow a potato in a bucket, and there is a weigh-in in the autumn, and the person with the most potatoes wins. Now, I don't think there's anybody else listening from Horton-cum-Studley who could possibly learn from what the panel are going to say, but I need to win. So how do I maximise the production of potatoes in my bucket, please?
You're clearly not at all competitive.
Not at all competitive.
OK, thank you, Sue. Well, let's see what we can do for you. Christine.
Look, the decent sport, there's nothing like it. It's it back end weighing them all out and everybody having a go at each other. The real key to success with potatoes in a container is planting them basically about 1/3 of the depth of the container, and start them off at that depth. And then as the stems grow, keep filling it up and keep them well watered and well fed. Don't allow it to get dry, because if it's dry, they go semi-dormant. So make sure that you stick that way down your finger, right down, and make sure that it's damp where the tuber is likely to be forming, not where you think it is near the surface. So plenty of moisture, and just keep them in growth.
Thank you. We have a problem, though. It's already grown above the level of the bucket.
Now you have got a problem. Now, what I suggest you do is start again. And you've got time to start again, so I'll do it.
Thank you.
And as you're going to start again, I wonder, Sue, if you might cheat. It's
Yes.
a shame we're bringing this out on the radio, isn't it? Because you could, if the rules are lax enough, think about growing a sweet potato and grow it indoors and give it plenty of heat and plenty of warmth. And then you'll win the weigh-in.
Yeah, I don't think the rules allow that, I'm afraid. Potatoes are issued.
Taxonomically, we'd have an issue with that. It's a very different vegetable, but still.
Can I also just say that I agree entirely with Christine. It's all about getting enough moisture in and at depth, which becomes increasingly difficult as you earth up. So what I would suggest, if you do start again, is to get a piece of perforated land drainage pipe, and to put that down the side of the container and then coil it around the base, because that gives you the opportunity to water deep into the container. So every time you water, instead of watering the compost, you put your watering can or your hose pipe into the upright part of the perforated pipe. You can fill the pipe, so you'll get several litres of water, which, because it's perforated pipe, will then gradually leach out into the surrounding soil. Failing that, I think a farmer's market would be the place to go. And just, you know, because you can artistically arrange the tubers to look as though you've grown them.
Yeah.
And you know, or maybe, you know, on the journey to the weigh-in, you know, there was a speed bump and suddenly, you know, there was a bit of upheaval, but these are all the ones that I've grown.
Well,
so I think there's two options there. Start again or just visit the farmer's market.
That's very helpful. I'll let you know the outcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you and good luck. Let's take another question.
Alan Evans from the Track Ground Allotment Society in Oxford. What can I plant now that is fast growing and not a conifer that will replace our moth-eaten box hedge?
Yes, groans of recognition there from around the audience. Yeah, box moth, Chris Thorogood, has become a big problem, hasn't it, over recent years?
Yes, it has. I was actually examining some just recently in Oxford, not far from the Botanic Garden, and you can see just how devastating it can be. Could you tell us a little bit more about the aspect of the site?
It's south-facing and not particularly wet. It's quite a well-drained location.
Okay, I would take advantage of those wonderful conditions. So south-facing and well-drained means that you can grow something that likes a lot of warmth. And I'm wondering about actually a hibiscus even. You could grow several of those and it would be really impactful. It's very different to what you've got at the moment, but there's one called Hibiscus cynosyriacus, which has these a sort of magenta colour flower, I think I'd describe it, and it's quite exotic looking, and I think it would really give you some impact, because I think you've got such a wonderful spot there, Alan, that it would be a shame to grow something very pedestrian there. So that would be my suggestion. Go for something exotic and make the most of that great spot you have.
Chris Beartrap?
Well, as a direct replacement for something like box, people have tried all sorts of things, and one of the things that you'll very often get offered is Ilex crenata. You know, that's fine in some circumstances, but it's not overly successful. It does prefer a slightly acidic soil, and it does prefer well-drained but constantly moist. And that's not necessarily the situation that most of us have when we're looking for a replacement for box. I would say Myrtus would be the things to go. Grow a myrtle. Myrtus apiculata is a really good form, and takes very heavy clipping, reasonably quick growing, will get up to a significant size if you allow it, but will also stay at around about sort of 45, 50, 60 centimetres, you know, sort of traditional Buxus height. And I've had great success with that in the garden. And to give you some idea, our coolest temperature where I am in the Cotswolds, -15 on a very heavy clay soil, windswept from every direction. And contrary to just about every encyclopedia, that plant does really well. So I would suggest Myrtus.
And I would sort of keep the slightly unusual feel going with some of the Lupus Burnhams. They've done remarkably well at trials at Wisley. The Teucriums would do well. The silver foliage being particularly attractive. And interestingly, some of the dwarf rhododendrons that are on dwarf rooting stocks can make a fantastic hedge. Clip immediately after flowering, and they keep their habits. A lot of them, there's one called Cunningham White that will tolerate alkaline soils up to pH 8.5. So it's worth looking at some of those dwarfer, newer rhododendron species, because there's some belters around.
Spoiled for choice, Alan.
Yeah, that's great.
Hope it works well for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Hello, I'm Lucy Smith from Kidlington in Oxford. And I was just wondering if there's a way to avoid killing slugs, because I had a bit of a disaster with my Brussels last year.
But you're not keen to, bring an end to it?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I use beer traps, so at least they have a happy... But it's not quite what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Christy?
When you say they took your sprouts,
yes,
are you talking about young plants, very young plants? All I'm questioning is it's very unusual for slugs to annihilate sprouts. And I'm just wondering if that's what the... Did you see them on the
Yes,
plant?
I did, yes, yeah.
Lots of them?
Yes, yeah. I didn't particularly grow big over my sprouts. I put it down to the slugs damage, and would that be what it was?
No.
No. Oh.
No. Oh, I'd be very surprised if it was. Let's put it that way. I mean, slugs don't normally go for brassicas once they're established.
Ah.
So that's why I'm just questioning this. Was there plenty of slime around? Were there slime trails on the soil?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, let's go with slugs, if that's what... But, I mean, I'm rather surprised, and I mean, the other way is to put something that's going to attract them rather than the sprouts, so I would be putting things like carrot peelings and stuff like that as an alternative. Yeah. And just keep them well fed that way.
Yeah.
And then you can feed them up and do whatever you like with them. But I'm surprised they didn't not go to your Brussels sprouts.
Can I? Sorry, Chris. No, I was just going to say, I'm interested to know why you don't want to kill them, because every other person in the room is very happy.
Well, I'm vegan, so...
Okay, so you just don't want to needlessly allow them to come to a grim end. Can I suggest that you get chickens?
Oh.
So we have some chickens at home.
Yeah.
And and they were given a rather
field.
Well, yeah, but they turned up the nose at the sprouts because generally, did you know they don't eat brass? Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah, I heard that. Somewhat. I can't remember where I heard that.
Well, can I imagine where you heard that?
So what we've done is just to let our chickens go free range in the garden.
Right, yeah.
And so we've. It's not a massive, collection of chickens. There's 3 of them, and they just roam around. And there's not a single sign of any slugs or snails on anything like the hostas, Pelagonatums, those sorts of things. All of that sort of stuff that you'd expect to just get annihilated. Absolutely cleaned the garden out, and they've been roaming around the garden since the autumn, and they've just systematically taken away anything which is going to nibble on the plants, but they've also taken away all the annual weeds as well. So they've done a great job. I'm a big fan of free-range chickens.
There are deterrents for slugs, aren't there?
So I think, there are things you could do. We certainly wouldn't encourage you to put down pellets and things. It sounds like you're not, so that's great. I would be vigilant and look out for other pests as well, because these plants are a magnet for pests, not notoriously for slugs and snails, which is why I think we're just sort of wondering if there might be other things at play as well. So I'd keep an eye out, stay vigilant. And sort of persevere, really, Lucy.
Yes, yeah.
It's also worth bearing in mind that some of the options for slug and snail control sound as though they're very friendly, and actually they can be pretty gruesome. So, for instance, the nematodes, which you can get, which will knock out slugs, they eat the slug from the inside out. And so there's a good option, but it's not necessarily a very option.
Lucy's looking horrified.
Yeah, so sometimes just kind of picking them up and cycling to the end of the village and putting them in the stream somewhere is a bit more friendly.
Yeah. Well, good luck with a never-ending battle anyway, Lucy. Thanks for your question. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Sophia Ferdini from Germany, now gardening at Elderstub's allotments in Oxford, and I have a rather basic question. So I'm wondering, what's your favorite and absolutely least favorite tomato variety? Because I just moved here to the UK and I love my homegrown tomatoes from my lovely continental summers in Germany, and I'm just wondering what varieties thrive well here, if at all. Okay,
so you've had a lot of success with tomatoes in Germany.
Yes, I have.
Originally. What varieties would you have used?
I love my Bull's Heart tomatoes, I think they're called, and like cherry tomatoes. Red marble, they're called in Germany, like a wild variety that you can grow without protection. So I don't have a greenhouse. That's maybe also a factor that makes it more difficult.
Yeah. Chris Beardshaw, favourites and not so favourite?
Well, least favourite, moneymaker. An old form, my grandfather used to grow it, and it just occupied he had a lovely cedarwood glasshouse. And it was just the principal crop in his cedarwood glasshouse. He used to grow that and Elsa Craig. And so both really old forms. And I just remember the money makers that he grew as being sort of big, dry, flowery, tasteless. I mean, it was a bit like the joy of eating polystyrene. It was you know, completely pointless. Big, I mean, you know, enormous, the size of melons, but tasteless. And I would say favourite, brandy wine, I actually really like. But growing in my glass house, unheated glass house, for absolute reliability, I mean, I find that there's very little, especially in the cherry tomato department, that beats something like Gardener's Delight, which just performs year in, year out, and is a constant cropper. So it's not overly glamorous, but it just does the job.
Tastes lovely.
Thank you.
Christy?
My favourite is Sun Gold, because I like the slightly acidic flavour of that tomato. Tomatoes are very subjective in their taste, and the acidity levels increase and decrease depending on varietal influence and size of plant. The cherry tomatoes tend to have more acidity than the larger tomatoes. And it's down to taste, really, and I would suggest that you grow a whole selection of different ones, and then when you find one you're really keen on, stick with it. Different seasons can also have an effect as well. But the greater the concentration of sun, obviously the greater the concentration of sweetnesses and carbohydrates and starches that are produced. So it depends on the season. If it stays like this, they'll all be soppy and miserable and slush.
Welcome to the challenges of British gardening. Well, thanks for those answers, panel. More of keen gardeners here at Trinity College in Oxford soon. Oxford's quadrangles, or quads, are amongst the most celebrated and visited in the world. Each quad is a square or rectangular open space, partially or completely enclosed by buildings, and each comes with its own set of gardening challenges that home gardeners will be familiar with, such as working with bright sun or deep shade. Couple that with tradition and buildings that are hundreds of years old, and suddenly maintaining these quads becomes almost a forensic task. Well, earlier today, designer and GTT regular Chris Beardshaw rejoined head gardener Kate Burtonwood to talk about the challenges Chris faces in his redesign of Trinity's North Lawn border.
Well, do you know, it's great to see this border with the geotextile peeled back and a bit of soil. I think for many months that I've been visiting, there's been no soil visible. But here we are with a bit of soil next to the lawns.
So this essentially is the back lawns of Trinity that we're standing on at the moment. This is the last bit of college that you come to if you come in the correct way and don't sneak in the students' entrance at the back.
I like the fact that actually back lawns plays down just how grand it is. It sounds like a little patch of green behind, you know, type of. Actually, this is the main view of the college, because from Parks Road through the very ornate gates, looking on an axial path which runs parallel to the border we're standing on at Christopher Wren's Garden Quad, which is just one of the views of Oxford. One of the things that you said to me right at the beginning, don't make it too complicated to maintain. I mean, that was absolutely the thing I went home with when I first met you, which was, you know, it's got to be not just achievable, but you've got to be able to manage and maintain.
And I do. I have an absolutely wonderful team here, and their skill and expertise shines out across the gardens. But exactly, I think within that I've got a bit of a duty to almost make sure they don't have something which they then can't perform on, and they can't sort of show their skill if it becomes too much and too complicated. So it's wonderful to hear, you know, a designer listening to that as well, and the needs of the gardeners who are going to tend this spot. I think as well, it's, you know, that concept of a herbaceous border is very interesting, because what the empty space that we're standing in now proves is that this is a space where a traditional herbaceous border has not worked. There are no plants left here at the moment. You know, some of them were removed at the point where we went into a building project, but really it was a border that had largely died back. You know, it's either too dry or too exposed, or in parts too shaded for some of those plants that come into people's heads when they dream of an English country garden.
And the principle really of the new border is that we're using largely herbaceous perennials, some grasses, some ferns and bulbous, and the occasional smattering of trees and shrubs just to elevate and give us a little bit of punctuation through the border. But I suppose the big difference between what we're attempting here and the traditional border is that we're not going for those big extravagant scallops of shape where one plant stood in one spot. performed its role and then died back, and another one took over somewhere else at the border. We are mixing plants together. We're creating much more robust communities where we've got 5, 6, 7 plants all piled on top of one another, working together as a cohesive community, so that as one is just past its best, another one is just coming to its best. So there has to be a kind of an intimate understanding of the plant material. Hopefully that makes the management and maintenance of it much simpler, because there should be no need for staking. The density means there should be no weeding. There should be no feeding, because essentially we're harvesting the herbaceous material from the surface of the border at the end of the season, composting and then putting it back on at the beginning of the season, and that's all the nutrition the plants need. So what we're trying to do is to, in a way, use the horticultural technology to engineer out all of those complexities which have traditionally been a real challenge to a long herbaceous border, especially one which is, how long is it again? Just remind me.
It's 120
metres long.
I think we end up with something like 800 square metres of planting space. I mean, it's boggling. It's in itself larger than anybody's back garden, and that's just the border down the side of the garden. So it really is a lot.
And it's by no means easy, because although we're on a south-facing site with the wall of St John's behind us, we've got overhanging trees, so we've got canopy drip, we've got shadow. Some plants are going to have to thrive in the sunshine, some in more deep shade. We've also got root ingress as well from the neighbouring trees. We've got a soil which traditionally dries out as soon as the sun hits it. I mean, even after all the rain we've been having in the last few weeks and months, standing on the water today, it's parched. There's just an extraordinary range of horticultural challenges in order to get to that point where we can all sit back on the opposite side of the lawn and, you know, drink a glass of Pimm's and say, yeah, that border looks quite special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, I particularly love the things you're saying about sort of the use of the border and drawing people into it. I think one of our key considerations was about that accessibility as well, and the fact that people might actually not just be sitting on the lawns looking at the border, but they might be sitting almost within the border, looking at things and really being immersed in and close to plants. And I think getting people to do that in itself also changes the way they feel about plants and the way they feel about gardens. So I think that's another sort of very beautiful outcome of this redesign.
Trinity College head gardener Kate Burtonwood with our own Chris Beardshaw touring the herbaceous border on Trinity's North Lawn, recently redesigned by Chris. You're listening to Gardener's Question Time on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds with me, Peter Gibbs. Joining Chris Beardshaw on the panel today are Christine Wharton and Dr. Chris Thorogood. We're with an audience of keen gardeners inside the De Jager Auditorium at Trinity College, Oxford. Hello, audience! And which of you has our next question, please?
Hello, I'm Felicity Record from Wolvercote Horticultural Society. My peach tree has died. What can I replace it with? It's a windy, sunny spot in alkaline soil. I already have a lilac, a magnolia and a cherry, and I'd like some scent and some colour, please.
Okay, and are you thinking another tree or...?
A tall shrub, or not a fruit tree, because it obviously doesn't do very well. It's a very windy path.
Okay. Chris Thorogood, what would you recommend?
I've just come back from Sicily, Felicity, and I saw the most wonderful plant growing wild that you occasionally see in gardens here, and it's called Cytisus etenensis, and it's the Mount Etna broom. So when we think of broom, or at least when I think of it, I think of that lovely sort of flash of yellow that you sometimes see on the roadside. But this is like that, but with more vavavoom. So it grows larger, almost the size of a small tree. It's bright yellow, if that's the colour that you might be after, and it's got, I don't know how to describe the fragrance. It's almost like a sort of coconutty smell, but it's really quite pleasant. And it's like a little sort of patch of sunshine in your garden, and I think it would really like those conditions, the windy, sunny conditions, the alkaline, probably free-draining soil, I'm guessing, which would rather well replicate the conditions that it grows on Mount Etna in Sicily. So that would be my recommendation.
Slightly different climate, Chris?
But it does well here, actually. I've seen it growing very well. And I think also it's just a different climate, but Mount Etna is high, and it does get cold up there.
Christine, what would you recommend?
I'm going to follow Christie's lead as talking about a plant that you wouldn't normally expect to be growing in this situation, and that's Cytisus batandii, the pineapple or Moroccan broom. Beautiful, stunning silver foliage, and then the panicles of flowers, so groups of flowers that smell of pineapple. Now, if you look in old books, it's often suggested for a hot, south, sheltered side. Now, whoever invented that is their marbles looking at, because this is a plant that will take exposure and cold and is reliable. It can get quite large, but you can prune it. You often see it against the wall, but it makes a stunning freestanding shrub. So Cytisus batandii or the Moroccan broom. The fragrance is from it smells like you just opened a tin of pineapples and stuffed your nose in them.
What about you, Chris?
So I would say small trees, polite, well-branching, good blossoming, and very sweet fragrance. Malus Turinga is a very good one. Malus is a member of the apple family. Wonderful flowers at this time of the year. And colours up with good fruits, good reliable fruiting plants, so ornamental of the apple. You mentioned that you've got a magnolia, but if you could just treat yourself to one extra magnolia, and you need to just enrich the soil a little bit because it does need a sort of neutral soil rather than alkaline soil. Try and grow Magnolia Felix. Magnolia Felix has got the most enormous blooms on it. I mean, they are like that, he says, gesticulating at about 30 centimetres high. They're like 30 centimetre high, wonderful claret goblets. They are beautiful and just stunning and very, very sweetly fragrant. And now you would need to either train it or keep it as a multi-stem, so prune it and keep it low in order to be able to appreciate. Otherwise, you'll be able to see the flowers, you know, out of the first floor or possibly second floor window once it starts to grow. But Crataegus prunifolia would also be very good. Tough as old boots. Nice foliage, glossy green foliage when it comes out, and good flowers, good fruiting. And I wouldn't ignore the pears either. Pyrochanticleer, for almost the first of the blossoming fruits. In the UK, Pyrochanticleer, clear white blossom, very hardy, very tough, prune it into all shapes and sizes. That's a real beauty as well.
Thank you. Did you say it's just the one plant you wanted, Felicity? You're going to have to make a bit more space to get those. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lots of plant suggestions on today's programme, but you will find them all listed on the Garden Espresso Time pages of the Radio 4 website. Just look for the listing for this edition. Let's take another question.
Hello, I'm Chris Waite from Abingdon Horticultural Club and the Flower Club in Abingdon. Would you recommend the use of koi, the coconut fibre, and where would you use it, and how would you use it?
Okay. Christine, this is a substance that you tend to find in some of the peat-free composts now. Would you use it as just on its own, or
no.
Have uses?
I have tried it. I find it sits too wet with me, and I haven't managed to keep the moisture levels correct. It's a byproduct of the coconut industry. It comes from that part of the world, so there's implications associated with travel and all of that, whether it's sustainable or not. You could mix it in with your hanging basket compost, you could mix it in with your other compost. Some people use it as a mulch. But I find that it sits wet, and that would worry me a bit. I'm not a great fan per se of koi, to be honest.
Okay. Chris, do you find a use for it in the botanical gardens?
Yeah, we have experimented with it, Chris, and like you suggested, Peter, we've used it as a substitute for peat, and so we've done lots of trials in the past growing different things, particularly carnivorous plants. They're a real challenge because you can't grow them in ordinary compost, and going peat-free is not straightforward for growing specialist plants such as those. So we have done trials. I think really it does depend on the plant, and it requires a little bit of patience and trial and error, I would say. So similar to Christine, I wouldn't say it's straightforward to substitute, but I think it's the right thing to be looking at alternatives to unsustainable things such as peat. So I applaud the question, thank you.
I think one of the things about Koya is that it does stay very wet during the winter, but it dries out faster than you can believe during the summer. And so it makes managing the compost actually really difficult. And you can find that the top part of the pot has dried out, whilst the bottom is sopping wet. So it's not a great substitute on its own. So just adding fibre, it's fine, but not if that's the bulk of the growing medium that you're trying to use as a replacement for a peat-based compost. It's also, in addition to the issues in terms of how much water it holds on to or doesn't hold on to, it's also incredibly poor at holding on to nutrients. So one of the things about a peat-based compost, and one of the things that is celebrated, is that the nutrients are able to be held well by the peat-based composts and then made available freely to plants. And what you tend to find with a coir-based compost is that the nutrients just spill straight through. And so as a consequence, given a rainy season like this, if you've been growing your plants outside in a coir-based compost, you can very often find that they're in nutrient deficit because all the nutrients just simply washed out. So it's about learning a new process, really, if you enter into that sort of market. I mean, they are very good, or it as a product is very good at making pots. So you very often find vegetables available at this time of the year in coir pots. That's great. It also makes a really good doormat as well into your, you know, if you've got the sort of glass house that's regularly swept and, you know, you're house proud about your glass house, it makes a good doormat. But in terms of a direct replacement for peat in a compost, I think it's a challenge. If you're looking for a direct substitution for peat, leaf mould is brilliant. You know, you can get yourself a leaf mould bin, you know, make one, just some chicken wire. Fantastic. So if you've got one already, that's what you can be harvesting and mixing with your compost, because the nutrient holding capacity of leaf mould is superb, and it's very well regulated in terms of passage of water through the compost, and it's also rich in microorganisms. And it's those microorganisms which unlock the nutrients in the surrounding compost.
Our chickens really like leaf mould.
Yeah, mix some
I won't be feeding it to my chickens.
mix some chicken manure with your leaf mould and you've got rocket fuel.